welcome to all of you. My name is Bernard De Witt, and I'm the chairman of the Belgian-Chinese Chamber of Commerce, which is regrouping Belgian and Chinese companies doing business with China, and we are based here in Belgium. I'm very, very happy to organize this together with the Belgian-Luxembourg Chamber of Commerce in Russia, and I would like to thank the Russian Chamber for their co-hosting this webinar, and in particular the chairman of the Belgian-Luxembourg Chamber of Commerce in Russia, Mr. Stefan van Dooslaar, as well as the CEO of the Chamber, Mr. Oleg Prozorov. I wanted to thank all the participants. We will be around 100 today, which is a great success for the event. And I wanted to thank in particular Flanders Investment and Trade and Mrs. Verstralen and Mrs. Zhang Yiwei, as well as AWEX, and in particular Mr. Eric de Klerk and Mrs. Priscilla Tang. I will not be able to thank everyone in detail, but we are very happy that you are joining us today. Before introducing our first speaker, I would like to say that we chose the theme of the Silk Road, the ancient trade route which was linking China to the West, that carried goods and ideas between civilization from China to Rome, passing through Russia. Silk went westward when wools, gold, silver went east. The Belt and Road Initiative, which was formerly known as the One Belt, One Road Initiative, was developed by the Chinese authorities back in 2013 as a transcontinental long-term policy and investment program. It aims at developing infrastructural and accelerate the economic integration of countries who lie along the historical famous Silk Road. What is the Belt and Road Initiative? How do we characterize EU-Russia-China relations? Which business opportunities are there to discover for European and Russian companies? What are the opportunities offered in Russia and China? To answer these questions, we are very happy to have two prominent speakers with us. Before introducing Mr. De Primis, I would like to give the floor to Mr. van Dooslaar, the chairman of the Belgian-Luxembourg Chamber of Commerce in Russia. Mr. van Dooslaar, you have the word.
Yes, thanks, Mr. De Witt, and for these nice words. I just wanted to say hi to everybody and also to thank the Belgian-Chinese Chamber of Commerce for working together. If you look, COVID, everybody talks about COVID, and it was unthinkable, but the borders got closed for people, but the borders were never closed for goods. And I think this is also an important message. And I think today, by working together, looking at the One Belt initiative, but also working together between the Belgian-Chinese Chamber of Commerce and the Belgian-Luxembourg Russian Chamber of Commerce, I think it's important that we show that goods and business will never be stopped, even when there's a pandemic. That we will always continue. And I think working together and see that already now we have more than 50 people participating in this webinar means that there is a very high interest on this cooperation, this initiative. So I just want to thank you for the cooperation and organizing this webinar, and I'm looking forward to the speakers and to the input from all the participants today. So thanks a lot for this opportunity, Mr. De Witt.
Thank you very much, Mr. van Dooslaar, and thank you for being with us, even though you are in St. Petersburg at a time when it's holiday in Russia, but you are there, so you show the Belgian dynamism, even though it's a holiday time. Yeah. So I would like to introduce very shortly our first speaker, and I'm very happy that he found time to be with us today. Mr. Roberto De Primis is a graduate in political science from the University of Liège. He completed his academic career at the South Bank University in London, also at the University of Quebec in Montreal, and at the Solvay Business School in Brussels with an executive master in management. He has had already a brilliant career in the Belgian government, as well as in the European institutions like the European Parliament. He has been a diplomat at the United Nations in New York. Back in Europe, he has been the executive president of the Belgian-Vietnamese Chamber of Commerce, aimed at improving trade relations between the European Union and the Vietnam government. Currently, he heads the strategy and risk analysis consulting firm called Intelligence, .eu. He is very active in European matters and following closely EU, China, and America. So I'm very happy to give you the floor, Roberto. We listen to you. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much. Such a very interesting presentation from you. I should come way more at this chamber to have that positive presentation. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to both Chamber of Commerce, both respective in Brussels and Moscow. I will start just with a few words about the who I am, but I think you did a very, extensive presentation. So I'm the CEO of Intelligence. We work on strategy for growth and public affairs lobbying here towards the European Union, which gives you an idea of what we do here in Brussels. But let's go directly to relationship between Brussels and Beijing, between the European Union and China, because trade is like it started for both parts. China has become in 2020 the first EU trade partner, which is very, very important to understand how important export grew by respectively 5.6% and 2.2%, which means that now our look is getting towards east when we are in Brussels, and the main products still are machinery, vehicles, and chemicals. And during the pandemic, let me just underline that thanks to the activity of the China Railway Express, so between both continents, it helped to maintain high level of activity and trade during this very tough period we had. These are, and you can see it on the chart from Eurostat on the left, these are the main products traded between both entities. But if you ask which are the sector that would be the most profitable, we'll stick on some very well known like health and dentistry and eyeglasses. In tech and digital, there are still a lot of opportunities within the 5G related technologies, and the same for artificial intelligence. And I would underline the importance of quantum computing, which is reaching the top priority for both continents right now. Within cosmetics, online games, and online education, there are also a lot of profit to make and a lot of market share still available, way more within online education, which has been boosted by the pandemic. Getting on the presentation, we could ask us what is the real importance and challenge of the investment deal signed a few months ago between Beijing and Brussels. Indeed, in December 2020, both entities signed a comprehensive agreement on investment, called with the acronym TCAI. It reduced, of course, a lot of uncertainty for EU investors, and it opened markets, Chinese one, of course, to sector-specific one like electric vehicles, health sectors. I do remind you with the previous slide It is a very highly profitable sector, and some financial services, even though for financial disputes and investor protection, the KAI is still unclear and not all the specifications are clear for investor. What we have to bear in mind is that the new elected US President Biden took an executive order a few weeks ago called China Free Tech Supply Chain, which means that the market access obtained by the EU in December 2020 could trap some European companies in the market, which is bifurcating from the Europeans' main trading partner. So this is maybe a pitfall for the following months, but it's still an ongoing process. Still on the importance of and challenges of this EU-China investment deal, we have to understand that the Biden administration is trying to get some support to contain China, getting support from allies like Japan, like the EU, of course, and then European countries will find harder and harder to benefit from this deal if the stance in Washington is getting as tougher as we experience right now. There's also another little issue at the European Parliament, which has to discuss the KAI agreement. One of the review meeting called at the INTA committee, so the International Trade Committee at the European Parliament, has been cancelled. So there are a lot of concern among the business community, and what we can see also is that the US stance will be tougher and tougher in the following weeks. And at the G7 summit, mid of June, in the UK, Biden will try for sure to glue the European Union against China. So if I could advise foreign company right now, I would say that we stay in the wait and watch position to see how development unfold in the following weeks and months, at least just around mid-June, so early summer period. Now, the question is rivals or partner? Let's be honest with that kind of question, and having on the left the chart from Eurostat showing how the trade balance is quite unbalanced and in the red against, into brackets, of course, European Union. So the EU took years to have a China policy, but also an Asian policy, which means that we are quite late in relation with other partners like Washington, and sanctions, trade and boycotts. See what happened to H&M. See our relation entering in quite a negative spiral. The trading balance, as I said a few moments ago, is still in red, constantly negative for the European Union, but there is a willingness of Brussels as well to become to have is strategic autonomy raised by French President Macron and German Chancellor Merkel a few months ago, but this process will require more diplomacy with Beijing and a lot of political negotiation at the European Parliament. And last but not least, let me remind you that Hungary, Italy, and Latvia are still part of the Belt and Road initiative. They signed a memorandum with Beijing, so there are some European countries which have more integrated relation about the Belt and Road initiative. So next to pitfalls, challenge, opportunities, there is one bridge that is quite a bank for us. It is environment. There is the strategy called China 2060 about decarbonizing the country, and we know that when Chinese promise something, they stick to it, and above all, they are most of the time ahead of schedule, so they will stick on it. They will work closely with some allies like US, but also the European Union, because a few weeks ago in February 2021, the EU Green Deal chief chief, which is Franz Timmermans, held a video conference with the Chinese vice president, and they proclaim a good partnership on climate. But EU and US take still a different approach on linking human rights and climate with China, so which is still a different view that both sides have still right now. So before concluding, let me underline how will be the future of EU-China relation. First of all, we are not sure that the agreement signed in December 2020 will be adopted. So we will stay either in the 27 separate bilateral agreements with China or one biggest bilateral trade agreement. This is still on hold. We still don't know what would happen, and I think that the situation will be quite clear around mid-June. Trust are still to be rebuilt between both sides, above all after the pandemic. The EU is showing sign of getting closer to Washington, which can be thought at a little bit as a threat in Beijing. The US will surely sign agreement not about trade, but the agreement on environment with China. So there are still opportunities with China, even for the US. Technology is still on hold. We still don't know what will be the next chapter for Huawei technologies applied to 5G network and other kind of technology. We see the stance of some governments across Europe who blocked technologies. So it's still an ongoing process, and it's still not clear what will be the position of every European countries about that. And as a conclusion, EU-China future will be highly connected for sure, but the next chapter are still to be written by all EU leaders, and we'll see what will happen by mid-June 2020. Of course, this presentation will be available to everybody, so don't hesitate to add me on LinkedIn, and I will be pleased to send it to all the attendees. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Roberto, and I think you will interfere after in the question and answer session and a debate together with Mr. Gabuev. Now I leave the floor to Mr. Prozorov.
Yes, thank you, Mr. David. But I would like to thank, first of all, our speakers to accept to be a part of our event today. I would like to thank the Belgian-Chinese Chamber to co-organize together with us this interesting topic, because the Silk Road, the Russia is in the middle between the border with Europe and the border with China. And I would like to present to you Alexander Gabuev, the senior fellow and the chair of the Russian Asia Pacific program at the Carnegie Moscow Center. Alexander, I will leave you the floor then.
Thank you so much, and pleasure to be here. Thanks for spending your time with us. I'll just try to flesh out very quickly the new challenges and opportunities that the European firms are facing in the Russian market because of the state of Russia's relationship with the European Union and the West in general, and the growing entente and linkage between Russia and China. So there are both positive and negative sides from the business perspective. But let me first cover a little bit to give you context, the current state of Russia-EU relationship. And unfortunately here, my prediction is that it's going to get worse before it gets worse. Unfortunately, we don't have that many items that could make us very optimistic going forward. I think that first driver of the current state of affairs is the expanding sanctions program with the arrival of Biden administration in the US. There is a simplistic portrayal of Team Biden as anti-Russian, having a lot of grievances about Russian interference in 2016 and 2020 election. I would have a slightly different view, knowing a lot of the senior people, because they're always former colleagues at Carnegie and Albrecht Sundberg Group. They are pragmatic. They understand that In terms of geopolitics, the US has a far bigger fish to fry, which is China. And then they don't want to be distracted from the pressing needs of fixing the COVID problem at home and then reinvigorating domestic economic revival with the new infrastructure bill and many other items. So Russia needs to get out of the way. The round of sanctions which has been passed is basically to settle the bills for everything that happened before Biden and start a new chapter. We are expecting President Biden to see President Putin for a summit meeting, probably mid-June, somewhere in European Union, on European soil after Biden's meeting with the NATO members. But anyway, we don't see that many flashy, bright points of approval between the US and Russia, and that definitely affects Russia's relationship with the European Union as well. Second factor here is that Russia's economic growth remains very fragile and flat. Currently, the Russian government, led by Prime Minister Mishustin, is discussing internally yet another plan of structural reforms on how to reinvigorate the Russian economy. If history provides any lessons, we know that many of these discussions and structural reform packages are never fully implemented. So Russia still sticks with a lot of systemic problems that everybody who is working on the Russian market knows very well, with the unpredictable change of multiple policies, corruption, red tape, and many other things. So they are here likely to stay. And what we are seeing is that many European companies are trying to maintain their presence, their stake, their market share currently, but don't have too many aggressive expansion plans in the Russian market because of the lower risk appetite. And then final point, we see major shift in the energy markets in the European Union because of the green agenda, which is very welcome. We see additional political pressure on some large cooperation projects like Nord Stream 2. And that leaves Russia with its newly discovered need to monetize its hydrocarbon resources, which are still the backbone of the economy in the coming decade or two, because the Russian government is aware that peak consumption of oil and gas might be just around the corner, and Russia doesn't have really the time to wait till all of the natural riches in Siberia or the Arctic become attractive enough to monetize them. They need to bring as much to the market as they can in the short time frame, and they're here. China is looming as the big consumer and beneficiary. So Russia, China, I think that very quickly, we have three fundamental pillars in the relationship that are here to stay. Russia and China just 20 years ago signed a peace treaty and later on settled the territorial dispute. Both have been to military confrontation before, and they know that going back to hostilities is very costly and very risky. So the border now is a more factor of stability where both countries operate on a formula, not always with each other, but never against each other. Then there is the natural economic compatibility between Russia and China, just the way Russia enjoys with the European Union. There are very matching structures of the economies. Russia has abundance of natural resources, needs capital, needs technology. China is the exact opposite, just like European Union. So there is still an enormous potential for Russia to reduce its exposure and dependency on European market and build dependency on the Chinese market in order to achieve symmetry. And Russia is busy to do that. And then there are not that many political rifts between the two countries because of the authoritarian nature of both. So Russia couldn't care less about what's going on in Hong Kong or Xinjiang. That's never an issue. China couldn't care less about poisoning of Mr. Navalny or persecution of gay people in Chechnya. And I think that lack of this political disagreements is also a stabilizing factor for the business relationship. We've seen a gradual shift in Russian exposure to the Chinese market away from Europe. So in 2013, before Crimea annexation, Europe was roughly 50% of Russia's trade, with China being just 10.5% of Russia's trade. In 2019, the last normal year before the pandemic madness, Europe was already down to 41%, and China was up to roughly 16.5%. And then last year, COVID has actually accelerated this trend of rebalancing. So Europe went below 40%, it's now 38.5%, and China is hefty 18%. So it's still 2 times smaller trade volumes with China than with the European Union, but that change happened over 7 times frame. And then if we look long term, I think the trend line is pointing to the fact that the importance of China, China as a share of Russia's external trade, China as an investor and loan provider will continue to grow despite some setbacks and obstacles. So there are at least 3 areas where I expect this to happen. First is energy, which is understandable. Gazprom, Novatek, Rosneft, all the big oil and gas companies need to monetize their resources. Their markets in European Union are flat, and there is this window of opportunity in China. Russian companies are aware of the 2060 decarbonization pledges. They are aware of the plan to reach peak carbon emissions by 2030, but they try to market the natural gas as a bridge fuel between heavily dependent coal economy to economy where renewables, wind, solar, hydrogen will play a bigger role. And according to the Chinese government plans, which are partly revealed in the 14th 5-year plan document adopted in March in Beijing, China will increase its capacity to generate electricity from gas twofold between 2020 and 2030. So there is this enormous opportunity for Russia just to tap this narrow window, because after 2030, China is very unlikely to increase the natural gas generation capabilities substantially and will increasingly rely on renewables and nuclear. So that's something where we should watch for new big projects like Power Siberia 2, bring in roughly 55 billion cubic meters of natural gas from existing gas fields in Western Siberia and Yamal Peninsula in Russia, which are basically the gas fields that Russia uses to supply gas to Europe. So the same gas will now flow into China. There are very aggressive plans to develop the LNG potential in the Arctic, and the Russian state-owned companies in the oil sector like Gazprom Neft and Rosneft are also eyeing Chinese market increasingly. For Rosneft, China is now more than 50% of its sales internationally. So oil and gas, agriculture, where Russia sees a market and tries to compete with other, particularly using China's trade spat with Australia. And then finally, there is also huge potential for Chinese to enter the Russian market for industrial equipment. China has overtaken Germany as the major supplier of industrial tools to Russia back in 2016. And in 2020, it sold 3 times more industrial tools and machines to the Russian market than Germany. So this trend is very likely to continue, driven by the sanctions policy and the Russian attempt to import substitute and localize some production. Chinese firms are much eager and much more open to the idea to localize some parts of the production, give the Russian government an opportunity to claim that its import substitution programs are working efficiently, where in the reality, Russia just decreases its industrial dependency on the European Union and increases its dependency on China. We should all watch very carefully new emerging technology, particularly the debate about 5G in Russia, where now Huawei looks like a front runner to be the major partner of the Russian government in this. Final point about Belt and Road. As you know, Belt and Road is a very elastic concept. There are no clear or unified set of rules that drive this cooperation. There is no free trade agreement. There are no agreed standards. Basically, everything that checks the box of positive cooperation with China is part of Belt and Road. Everything that is viewed as negative or unsuccessful, China can always claim that it's not part of Belt and Road and something else. So Russia understands that this project is more about politics than about norm setting. Back in 2015, President Putin and Chairman Xi Jinping have signed a political declaration on linking between the Eurasian Economic Union, Russia-led trade bloc in the former Soviet space and China's Belt and Road. Basically, it's about cutting through the red tape and improving trade relationship through trade facilitation, not really talking about tariffs at this stage. Eurasian Economic Union and China have signed an agreement. It's still more an MOU and a framework agreement that points to directions where both sides would be improving ties to increase trade in goods. Nations of the Eurasian Economic Union have power to establish agreements with China in the national jurisdiction, not going to the Eurasian Economic Commission, in trade of services. And that's exactly what Russia and China are talking about now, although there is no official negotiation open. But my expectation is that Russia and China will increasingly rely on bilateral agreements because, as you all know, China is more interested in participating and leading the norm establishing process in Asian trade. It has joined the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. According to Chairman Xi, China is very much looking into joining the TPP, particularly since the US will not be joining this trade bloc anytime soon. In Russia, discussion about joining RCEP or TPP is absolutely not there, not in any single government quarter. Just some very enlightened officials in the Ministry of Economy are commissioning a study to look into the possible effects, but don't expect Russia to enter any of these trade blocs anytime soon, which leaves Russia more on a turf of talking to China bilaterally. Again, I don't expect any major free trade agreement between the two, but I would expect more deals on trade facilitation and Russia trying to secure access to the Chinese market in agriculture, where Chinese companies trying to secure access to the Russian market in high-tech industrial tools, and partially eating the lunch of European companies in Russia. Final point, I think that despite all of the emerging risks and emerging competition with Chinese companies that some of the European companies are facing, there is also a potential to work in the Russian market through China-listed subsidiaries of European companies. We see some Germans already operating that way, and we probably will see many more examples of that. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Alexander. Very, very interesting. But it's true that Germans are the most present European, I think, in Russia. But we have also Belgian company working in Russia, and also in agriculture and other sectors. May I just ask one question after your brilliant speech? That means that today, as I start speaking, the Russians stay between China and Europe, and finally, with the involvement on China in Russia and in Europe, it will be finally the Chinese who will be the mediator on the relation between Europe and Russia. What is your opinion on that?
I don't think that the Chinese have the capacity or really the desire to be a mediator. I think that Europe is far more important for them as a market, as a source of technology. They clearly see that because Team Biden continues the decoupling policy, although not as abrupt, is much more thought through than the way that Team Trump did it. But still, the policy of decoupling is there, and then winning hearts and minds of Europeans, as Roberto has brilliantly pointed out, is very important for the Chinese. And it's both a tactic of winning some powerful friends. It's no surprise that BASF, the largest petrochemical company in European Union, is allowed to establish a huge facility in Guangdong. It's 10 billion euros investment without any Chinese state-owned partner. And they try to turn BASF and companies like BASF into friends of China and their voices in the European Commission and European capitals. So there is this policy. And then they know that relationship between Russia and the West is bad, and it probably will decrease and deteriorate even further. So they can work on Russia tracks separately without trying to kind of play any role of interlocutor or a bridge, a role that they don't have any experience with, and they don't see any practical value to be involved in that kind of capacity.
Okay, thank you. And Roberto, you have your vision from Belgium. I know that you are very connected with the European Commission, European Parliament's workers in Brussels, and maybe you have some different opinion.
Could you repeat, because there was a cut in the, could you repeat the question in just a few words, if you don't mind?
But my question was that today the Chinese companies, Chinese businessmen are very active both in Russia and in Europe, and finally with the worst and worst relation between Russia and Europe, that will not become Chinese who will be the mediator in some type of bilateral relation between Russia and Europe.
Well, it's going to be quite difficult to find a good mediator, because usually we take international organizations like United Nations, but we saw in the past years, it's an agora where we can have discussions, but problems are not solved anymore over there. So I see only discussion that could improve, getting closer to dialogue, like what will happen in mid-June between US President Biden and President Putin. So it's going to happen in just a few days. So it's going to be the G7 in UK, the NATO summit, and then the Putin-Biden meeting. And for sure, they're going to be EU and US meeting in Brussels next to the NATO meeting. So just in 5 to 6 days, we're going to see dialogue catching up, but the physical one, because it's very important. You know, all these new technologies applied to us during the pandemic. Is quite good to keep contact, but the real diplomatic negotiation are the physical ones. So like meetings. So we'll see what could be the real catch in mid-June during 5 to 6 days. I don't see any countries to be, you know, the real link. We will sit around the table and see in which way and in which sectors we can find a solution or an agreement. And I still believe in trade and environment are still the main two paths, and all the technologies related to environment, of course, or applied. It can be AI and 5G, but applied to environment. So there are still a lot of opportunities, but just wait a little bit until mid-June.
Thank you. And Alexander, you agree with Roberto's position?
Sure, I agree that environment and supply of tech, like green tech to China, will be probably one area of cooperation that's shielded from the bigger geopolitical rifts and dynamics, because it's mutual interest of both the US, China, European Union, and even other parties to prevent climate change. We saw that during the most recent climate summit hosted by Biden. We saw that during John Kerry's visit to China, which went very productive. So I think that Team Biden is open to the idea that green tech should be coming to China without any restrictions. I would be cautious, though, on artificial intelligence and 5G, because to me, the current US team looks many of those technologies as having dual use. So they would be both civilian and the PLA. And because of the civil military fusion introduced by Xi Jinping as one of the kind of pillars of the new economic model there, here I think that the US would be very kind of cautious, careful, and many European companies might find themselves navigating an increasingly complicated landscape of facing potential sanctions and secondary sanctions. And here, that area would be not as clear as green tech.
Okay, thank you, Alexander. I invite all the participants to just unmute the microphone. If you have questions, we will pass to the Q&A session. Mr. David, what do you think? It's time.
Yes, Mr. Prozorov, and maybe I would have a question and start with Roberto, because you explained that EU and China has signed an investment treaty, the the CAI, Comprehensive Agreement on Investment. Well, it has been signed by the Commission, but what about the approval by the EU Parliament? And isn't there a contradiction? On one side, the EU is signing through the Commission a document that has still be approved by the Parliament. But on the other hand, you mentioned that the EU Commission considers China as a systemic rival. So is then there a contradiction? Maybe Roberto and Mr. Gabuev, if you could comment on that.
Thank you, Mr. De Witt. I will try to be quite short, so I give you the floor. I will give the floor to the participant to ask question. I do still believe that the real push came from the German Chancellor Merkel, who pushed a lot mid-December to sign the agreement between trade agreement and investment agreement between China and the European Union. So the real problem right now, it's compulsory that the agreement receive a vote from the European Parliament. You cannot go beyond without that approval. And right now, it's still an ongoing negotiation, and I'm not sure that they're going to have the majority to for this agreement. So I'm a little bit cautious about that. The only thing that could change the real storytelling right now within the European Parliament, it's what will happen in September in Germany, because the general elections are coming in September 2021 in Germany. So Chancellor Merkel is giving the seat of chancellor to somebody else, and I do believe that if the push is still coming from Berlin for this agreement, there will be heavy negotiation within the European Parliament, waiting also for the next early 2022. There is the French presidency of the European Union, and we have to see if they're going to push or not for this agreement. So it's still an ongoing process. I do understand that a few months ago, it was in 2019, the European Commission talked about China, about a systemic rival. I think they had a tough stance against Beijing, but Brussels as a whole, the European Commission, understand as well that the pivot to Asia is so important. Just have a look at the agreement, the RCEP agreement, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership signed a few months ago among Asian countries. So they are not signing bilateral trade agreement with US, with the EU, but among themselves now. So the pivot is over there. It's very important, and the European Union cannot lose this opportunity. So they understood where are the big opportunities in environment, in technologies, in electric vehicles, in batteries, and so on. So we're going to have 6 to 9 months of ongoing negotiation. Mid-June, as I said before, and end of September to have a clearer vision for the bilateral relation between China and the EU.
I would only add here that China didn't help itself by introducing sanctions to counter European sanctions over Xinjiang, including some prominent and powerful MPs of the European Parliament. Definitely doesn't help, and definitely doesn't create the momentum in the European Parliament to kind of endorse the comprehensive investment deal that already was questionable on part of some prominent leaders like Bütikofer and others. And then sanctioning some of the European Commission's entities is also not super helpful. And there is no way that China could walk back those sanctions. And it's hard for me to imagine that the European Parliament will back down. So we are here in a stalemate. I totally agree with Roberto about the importance of the upcoming elections in Germany. It's terrible now and impossible to predict the German politics, and we are in that phase when German politics becomes less predictable than it used to be. I think that all the polling now points to the fact that the Green Party might play an even bigger and more prominent role in whichever is the shape of the new coalition. Green Party is a not big fan of the investment deal because of Bütikofer, but because of many lingering foreign policy views. So that's the second point. And then the third point, we all shouldn't forget about Team Biden. I think that view of many senior officials in charge of China and Europe relation, like Amanda Sloat, who is director at the NSC, Laura Rosenberger, who is director on China at the NSC, they're both opposed to this deal. And I think that the US knows how to navigate the EU, work with Eastern European members just to torpedo the deal and add additional conditionalities and hardships. So I think that the deal is up in the air, and we shouldn't expect any free passage of it.
Thank you, Mr. Gabuev. Before giving the floor to our public, I had one more question for you. You explained very clearly the areas in which business is developing between Russia and China, and energy, agriculture, industrial tools, and think to energy especially. Isn't there, is the Russian government not afraid to be too dependent on China at one moment?
That's a great question, and I think that there is a kind of quiet conversation between the government and the experts and within the government circles themselves. I think that they are not, they are somewhat worried, but this worriness doesn't stop them to continue to double down on this course on building more dependency on China. And there are a couple of factors here. First, the dependency is still rather small. So it's 2 times less than exposure to the European Union. So there is still enormous capacity to pull eggs out of basket Europe and put them into basket China from the Russian viewpoint. The second point is that Russians are kind of thinking in retrospective, and they tend to securitize a lot of business ties. And the view is, like in 2014, when we decided to annex Crimea because our red lines have been crossed, we were so exposed to European Union and the West, so dependent on the bond market, loans for corporate players, on technology and stuff. And despite that, we were able to stand up, to punch the West in the face, and to kind of start our own decoupling regardless of economic cost. So if back at that point, we have this ability, we definitely will be able to do so with regard to China 10, 15 years down the road if China starts to misbehave in our view. And then, by the way, we don't have any countries in between like Ukraine. Central Asia is much more manageable. I think that the tensions over Central Asia have yet to be materialized, but so far, Russia and China have found a pretty good way to cooperate there and manage their existing tensions in the region. So the expectation here is that, yes, this asymmetry might lead to China having leverage and exploiting this leverage, but this is probably 10 years from now, so we don't have to worry now. And then we'll always be able to push back. My final point, to me, that's pretty short-sighted, because as much as Russian interlocutors, and I think that a lot of you have heard this from the Russian colleagues a lot, that, oh, you know, these rules that European Union is proud of are really non-existent. They can be used differently to different players. They're unhappy about the Court of Arbitrage in Stockholm and this and that. But the bottom line is this: the Russians have been an active commercial player in Europe for decades after the dissolution of the Soviet Union and before. And they have been quite successful. They know Europe well. Europe is rules-based, and yes, there is politics, but they more or less know how to navigate the European political and commercial landscape. And there is competition, and there are multiple power centers that the Russians can exploit divisions between. In China, ultimately, there is just one market force, which is called the Communist Party of China. So on paper, for example, if we are talking oil and gas, there are 3 largest oil and gas state-owned companies that are in competition for Russian resources. But ultimately, if the party tells them to have a unified front and kind of use that as a leverage to get better deals with the Russian companies, they ultimately will do that. So I think that Russia having 40% of your trade with China 10 years down the road is something very different than having 40% of your trade with the European Union. And that's something that the Russian leadership doesn't understand for now. And then back in 2014, Russia could turn to China in order to offset the losses from rupture with the EU. 10 years down the road, Russia will not have other party to turn to. Russia will be stuck in itself because the relationship with the European Union continues to deteriorate. The rivalry with the US is pretty kind of harsh. And then China will have an upper hand in this. And I think that particularly when we are talking about the core technologies of the future, like 5G and stuff, being stuck in China's pocket is a very bad prospect, that it's not that much on the horizon of our senior officials.
Thank you very much. Oleg, I leave it up to you.
Thank you, but I invite our participants from Belgium, from Russia, from China to ask questions. If you hear me, you just must unmute your microphone because we don't have. Yeah, I see here. Yeah, yes, there was some noise. No. There is some questions to Mr. De Primis regarding the EU-China relationship. What conclusion could we draw from some European countries such as Italy? A recent agreement to join the BRI, especially regarding the EU position toward China. Is China favoring bilateral relation in a context of growing mistrust in Europe? It's a question to you, Roberto.
Yeah, if I did get well that question, first of all, the agreement signed within the Belt and Road Initiative between China and some European countries, which are EU state member, are memorandum of agreement, which means that they are not legally binding countries. They can withdraw whenever they want. I do remind you that Italy, for instance, just opened the golden door to the European market via the haven of Trieste, just next to the Slovenian border, which is very important for all the trade between China and the European Union, but it was signed under the previous government in Italy, not the Mario Draghi's current government. So, which means that Latvia, Hungary, and also Italy could withdraw from this agreement with China within the Belt and Road Initiative. So, yeah, there is a different vision between what's happening on the European Commission trying to trade directly and having signed this CAI agreement with Beijing. So, I do believe that this is still on hold, but there are 40% chance to success for this agreement. So maybe Beijing will try to push harder to sign other agreements, but still kind of memorandum within Beijing and other country, which means also that it can be killed in overnight by a power which would like to push more to a European standard towards China being way tougher, which means that if Biden, as Alex said before, which if President Biden wants to push some Eastern European countries to withdraw from the agreement, it will be quite easy to do that.
Okay, thank you, Roberto. And there is also one question from the Wallonian Export Agency. Do the One Belt initiative already influence the cost of import-export activity between European Union and China?
Well, we have to divide the problem in several ways, but we have a few times here. The supply chain is still working and quite well, and as I said before, with the railway train connection between both continents. So the only real problem is coming from the maritime cost. So trade via tanker, etc., is worth something like 90 to 92% of the world trade. It's getting via sea and we saw what happened with the crisis in the Suez Canal a few weeks ago. The giant Danish supply chain company, Maersk, said that disruption will go on until end of May. So with 1 week disruption in the Suez Canal, the disruption will go on until end of May. So the cost is not quite clear. The cost will also get higher and higher because there are not enough containers on the Asian route between Europe and Asia, the empty one getting back to Asia. This is the only issue right now. For the rest, we don't see critical high cost change right now.
Thank you, Roberto. And practically similar question. China is mainly importing raw materials, the wood, the agro, and do you expect a change to more added value for these goods, for bio-foods production, for furniture? Maybe Alexander may reply.
You come again.
But it is a question which is say China is mainly importing raw materials, the woods, the agro, the petrol. Do you expect a change to more added value on the goods, bio foods production and the furniture?
From Russia, I think that first, China imports more value-added goods from Russia than Europe does. And that's because of the military contract. We are a major arms supplier to the BLA, and will probably continue to be the next 5 to 10 years. And then there are still some contracts in the civilian nuclear cooperation. So the Rosatom is building some of the reactors in China still. So there is this. There is the prospect of developing wide-body aircraft and heavy lifting helicopter. So far, the cooperation is pretty much stuck because the Chinese want to have the technology from Russia, but don't want to give the market share. And I think that it's pretty complex negotiation that's going for the last decade. So I don't expect any clear breakthroughs there. I think that we will see some value-added exports from Russia to China on part of agriculture, but that requires a lot of work, licensing and getting the permits and quotas. And probably what you're going to see is the export of IT, the software, not the hardware. But you see a couple of Russian funds having sold some IT products to the Chinese market. We see a lot of interest on part of Chinese companies in face recognition algorithms. So many of the solutions that the Russian companies provide in terms of algorithms are there. And then don't forget about partnership forms that are not necessarily direct exports, but Huawei is...
Your microphone, Alexander.
Yeah, Huawei has tripled its research staff in Russia following Western sanctions. Another hidden form of export of value-added products developed by Russian firms and researchers working for Chinese companies in Russia.
Thank you, Alexander. Roberto, maybe you will read. There is some question in the chat about EU regulation and the GDRP, and I will let the floor to Jochen Lambers, which request to give a question.
Good afternoon. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you for your presentations. Very interesting, very news-bringing as far as I'm concerned. Both speakers more or less refer to the political changes which are upcoming in most of all in Germany. And both speakers agreed. None of the speakers had or referred to any political changes in China, which everybody understands. However, none of the speakers referred to the upcoming elections in Russia. Does that mean that they are going to influence, like the political changes in Europe, any economic development between the three continents, Europe, China, and Russia?
Alex, I will introduce and then give you the floor because I think that you have a way better view, a better vision of Russia. Joe Lambert, thank you for the question. Just a few words. When you see the influence of Chancellor Merkel and the German engine, because it's the engine of the economy, when you see the influence they've got on the European institution, how they can push for a trade agreement between the EU and China, mainly because of the automotive industry and the electric vehicle export-import part, etc. So you see that if there's a change in Berlin, there is quite an influence on the European Parliament and the European Commission, and so also at the EU Council, so where head of states are gathering once every 3 months. So up there will be quite a lot of change if, for instance, the Green Party will get way more votes this time. This is totally different in Russia. When you see the general election are coming in September, I think around September 20th in Russia, it's general election. But I'm still positive on that one, and that it will not change a lot in the bilateral or trilateral relation. But Alex can have the floor about that.
We see, thanks for the question. I think that we already are witnessing tightening of the domestic political climate in Russia, because it's clear what the outcome of the election is likely to be. The Putin's party, United Russia, will maintain control, and we basically will have the same setup. Maybe the fourth party will be a different party. There is an attempt to build a new party from scratch. We'll see that. But the Kremlin has reasons to be worried because the disposable incomes are going down significantly. We see multiple products, not necessarily Navalny related. So they want to play it safe rather than be sorry later. And the tightening of the political environment here is very visible. There is persecution of Navalny's infrastructure. There are multiple court cases. There is tightening of the law. There is throttling of Twitter and threat to inflict more pain on Western tech giants if they don't comply with the Russian laws. So I guess that this will definitely not improve the environment for relationship between Russia and the West in general. That definitely the European Parliament will not sit idle. It will comment on what's happening in Russia. That will make the Russian officials even more angry. And that's a vicious cycle we've seen many times before. And that will only probably bring Russia closer to China if there are some gross violations of human rights that the European Parliament or the US feels kind of pressure to push back against with some additional sanctions.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Alexander. Normally, it's now on our schedule, my last 5 minutes, but I will contribute my time to the other question because I think it's very nice that we have more questions. I see the hand raised on RIO. I don't know with RIO, but maybe if it's the questions.
Thank you very much. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Well, obviously, China will be a key important part of the world trade system.
May I please ask you to just present yourself, please?
Sorry. My name is Rio Praning Pravira Ninglot. I'm the managing partner of PA Europe. So, do you still hear me?
Yes, please.
All right. I'm talking through my mobile phone, so that's why I can't see what happens. At any rate, so clearly China will be a major element, a key element of any world trade system. The question is, however, about the quality and about timing. So clearly current policies of both Russia and China have stimulated what the US has observed, a closer alignment between the US and the European Union. Many other issues that have been referred to during this call seem to stimulate almost the opposite of what is in the interest of both China and of Russia. If I just forget about current issues and look at the not so distant future, food and water. China is running out of both. And the water deficit is, of course, a very crucial issue. This is why there's so much food being imported into China. Is there thinking going on in China and perhaps also in Russia with regards to the food technology, the new ways to produce food, and therefore resolve a critical strategic dependency that China recognizes? And that, of course, is part of the moving factor behind its current strategies. So the direct question, maybe to our Chinese experts or Chinese friends, is what is considered to really look into the 2030, 2050 time space, and how can China then use its quite brilliant technology in many ways to assist the whole world, but particularly itself, with the water and food calamity that may open up.
I go on, Alec, because I introduced and then Alex can go. That is quite a very interesting question, as was the previous one. Thank you, Rio. About energy, about rare earth and all that kind of raw material. Everything is going to be traded around that in the following months and years. See what's happening when Chinese are tightening the access of rare earths to US company, as it did for that with sanctions, etc. So there are there is a real issue surrounding raw material in the following years of trade, bilateral or multilateral trade in the following years. So your question is very important, but was way more related to water and food. Let me just get back in 2015. At that time in Milan, it was the international fair about food and the future of food. It was so interesting to see how many Chinese companies were attending this international fair. It was something like Better Food for a Better World. It was the name of this international fair. So they are totally aware in China. They are totally aware that they've got some problems and pitfalls about water. First of all, this is also why they are really, turned towards Tibet and keeping Tibet with them, because there are two big springs over there. So this is an issue known in Beijing and in every province. They are working on it for new kind of food and food technologies, and using also technologies from other companies, foreign companies, but it's not a new ideas in the mind of the top management in Beijing. It started a decade ago, and they were permanently active even in 2015 at the Milan Universal Fair about food and better food. So they know about that, they work about that, and they deal with foreign companies to have the best technologies about that. So just to give an introduction, and maybe Alex could go on with other ideas.
Yeah, very quickly. First, food security is enlisted among the 6 stabilities enshrined in the 14th year plan and the plan beyond. So definitely the Chinese government is working heavily on this. I think that water management, treatment of wastewater, and all of the green tech around water management is an essential part of that. Another part is the impact of climate change and the way to address climate through emissions. And I think that my experience of talking to Chinese regulators is that they see that as interlocked problems. So there will be some domestic solutions on that. And then on the Russian angle of this, I think that China just sees a lot of potential to import more food from Russia, more water-intensive goods. I think that the Russian companies discover that the way to enter Chinese market is in partnership with Chinese companies. So we see that Kofco, a food producer and a food trader, is rapidly expanding its presence, including in the Russian Far East. and is positioning itself as a major partner for Russian local food producers to enter the Chinese market, work on the customs issues, the quotas, and stuff. And so far, this model works. Probably COFCO will enter into some shareholder agreements with some major food producers in Russia. So that's just one of the avenues that the Chinese government is exploring in this part of Eurasia.
Thank you, Alexander. And the last question I see here in the chat, I think it's for you, Alexander. Do the One Belt initiative, it's practically on the same way. Do the One Belt initiative influence the economic outlook or development for the Russian economy in the next 5-10 years? Which is the influence on Russian economy?
Again, nobody in the Russian leadership believes that Belt and Road is a thing in itself. It's a very flexible and adaptable concept, narrative formation, rather than a well-calculated and executed plan. What matters for Russia is that Chinese global footprint grows. The demand for imported hydrocarbons, including land-based hydrocarbons, grows. There are multiple avenues where China sets its strategic priorities, like investment into the Arctic, that are aligned with the kind of Belt and Road narrative. So that's one, and that's definitely the source of economic growth that Russia wants to tap. And then there is a very narrow definition of the Belt and Road, that's cargo transit going from Europe to China on land. And we see that this is exploding. Of course, it's subject to the subsidies that Chinese government still has to deploy in order to support, because so far it's uneconomic. But given the vulnerabilities of the global supply chain and logistics, just very much at display last month during the crisis over Suez Canal, I think that still there is enormous potential for this growth. And even if Russia and China manage to bring just 2 or 3% of the cargo transported on the sea routes through Suez Canal to the land-based routes using Trans-Siberian and Kazakhstan-Belarus railway connection, that's definitely going to make a lot of money for both the railway companies, the private contractors, and also that will streamline logistics for example, food producers in Russia, but also in Europe, targeting some areas like Xinjiang and Western China.
Thank you. Thank you. Dear Alexander, dear Roberto, thank you very much. I think we have all have spent very interesting hours. We are on time, and I would like to thank my colleagues from Belgian-Chinese Chamber for this general idea to organize today this events. All the participants, thank you very much. And I believe next year we will repeat one events, but I believe offline, maybe in Brussels, maybe in Moscow. And I invite all of you to follow the activity of the Belgian-Luxembourg Chamber in Russia and the Belgian-Chinese Chamber in Brussels. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, and please stay safe, everybody.
Thank you to all.